I just want to make sure. Okay, it's recording. All right. So, hello and welcome to my channel. I'm really excited because this morning I have Dr. Stephen Hussey on, and I am going to totally pretend like this is something that I do every day, where I'm just interviewing doctors, right? But yeah, truly, this is just really an honor. Some of you know I've shared the story of my 10-year-old son, Elijah, who was recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And I come to find out about Dr. Hussey through Jill's YouTube channel, and I was just so like brought in by his story, and I ended up reaching out to him, and the rest is history. He just provided a lot of great information, and he was kind enough to oblige me when I reached out to him after the fact, after our initial consultation, and asked him if he would be willing to come on my YouTube channel. And I was just like, Lord, please let him say yes. And he did. So here he is today. So with all that said, do you want to just go ahead, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your medical background?
Yeah, sure. I got interested in health back in college, from my own health issues that I had. And I started to notice that how I live my life had an effect on my ability to manage the conditions I had. And I'd never been told that from any doctor. So, long story short, I went to chiropractic school, and then I got a master's in human nutrition and functional medicine. And so now I practice chiropractic, very neuromusculoskeletal, ailments and things. But I also am a health coach, and I help people with complex chronic conditions, including type 1 diabetes, because I myself am type 1 diabetic. And so I really focus on food. I mean, changing what I've eaten has made the biggest impact on, with everything that I've done to help my health. That's the biggest impact has been with changing food. I kind of share my message, and I hope people, get benefit from it, and I help people achieve higher levels of health.
Okay, well, so let's back up a little bit. So you did just mention that you yourself are a type 1 diabetic. So can you just kind of take us back to when you were first diagnosed? How long have you been,
Mhm.
a diabetic? Kind of just a
Yeah.
backstory.
Yeah. I've been diabetic now for 25 years. It's
Okay.
25 years in March. I was diagnosed when I was 9 years old. Um, so yeah, I remember, I remember a little bit about everything that happened. The main memory I have is that I felt weird in computer lab, which was a class we had in third grade. And, uh, and I just remember feeling weird and having to go to the bathroom all the time. And the teacher thought I was, probably up to something, because I kept asking if if I needed to go to the bathroom. And so I told my mom, and she took me to the doctor. And I remember that my PCP diagnosed me with type 1 right there, because when they tested my blood sugar, it was over 700.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's why I was feeling weird, obviously. And so they took me to the hospital, and I was there for a week. And they taught us how to manage type 1 diabetes. My mom said that they made her go to classes, and to learn, what to do and that kind of stuff. And and so I've kind of been dealing with that for 25 years. But what led up to that was that, before that happened, I had a very, I guess, inflammatory childhood. Like, I had all these inflammatory conditions and ailments. So I used to break out in chronic hives, like all over my body, and they didn't know why. I had asthma, I had terrible allergies, I had IBS. And so all these are very inflammatory conditions. And yeah, like my childhood was full of those kinds of things. I had a pretty normal childhood, but I dealt with those issues.
Hmm.
Um, and then eventually ended up in my body attacking itself, and attacking the cells that make insulin. And so now I'm type 1 diabetic. And so, yeah. And then, when I got to college, I started realizing that I could change my life, and or how I live my life, and affect the ability, or my ability, to manage those conditions. And I'm happy to say that all those inflammatory conditions are gone, aside from type 1 diabetes, which was kind of like
All right, so sorry about that. We were having some technical difficulties, but we're just gonna go ahead and carry on. So,
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I was just saying that, the advice that I got from endocrinologists was good and all well intentioned, and the medical education I got was all helpful, but none of it really told me how best to control the conditions I had, especially type one. And so that was kind of things I had to figure out by myself. But that's kind of my backstory, all the way from when I was diagnosed to when I started making changes to my life that, or I guess experimenting, trial and error kind of stuff to figure out what worked best.
okay. So before we get into like you landing on the carnivore diet, did you have like a honeymoon stage at all? And if you can, just explain even what a honeymoon stage is, and if you did have one, how long did it last?
Yeah. Um, as far as I know, I did, because I remember my parents and my doctors talking about it a lot, that I was in the honeymoon stage. Um, and I remember them being amazed when I was a kid that I was able to keep my blood sugars in control as well as I was. And to them, that they thought that meant I was in a honeymoon stage. My body was still making insulin. So when you're diagnosed with type one, you're usually it's juvenile onset, or it has been in the past. Although my brother is also type one, and he was diagnosed at 22. So it can happen later in life as well, and that's happening more frequently. But a honeymoon phase is when, so like your body attacks the cells in your pancreas, and so they don't work anymore. They can't make insulin, and so, but it's not like a one and done. It's not like the attack happens and then they're gone. It's kind of a gradual thing. And so if your body's attacking those cells, it can take, you know, depending on the person, it can take a while for them to kill them all. And so your body's still making insulin, and that's called the honeymoon phase, where you're type 1 diabetic because you're having trouble controlling blood sugars, but you're still making some insulin, and so you're still getting some of the benefit from those cells. And so, as far as I remember, I definitely had that stage. I don't remember exactly how long it lasted. I'd say maybe a year, but I do remember, going to my doctor early on after diagnosis, and them saying, "Wow, you're really doing well. Um, it sounds like, based on how much insulin you're having to take, uh, or not take, is that you're in a honeymoon phase." And so, yeah.
So over the course of this year,
Mhm.
or so, when you were going through the honeymoon stage, did you have to take any insulin at all, or no?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
And back then I was doing injections, and so I would take, I don't remember exactly, but I remember maybe like 24 units of like long lasting insulin, um, and then yeah, that's what I remember in my head. I don't know when exactly that was, but and then with meals I'd have to take more for my meal that I had. Um, so yeah, I was definitely having to take insulin, but they were considering it to be less than what most people were having to take, you know, and they said that was because I was still making some insulin.
Okay, awesome. All right, so you did see a significant reduction in how much you had to take.
Yeah.
So then the question is, during that time, what was your diet like?
Yeah. So at that time, I was eating the standard American diet. I
Hmm.
was eating, lots of processed foods. I mean, I remember eating cereal every morning. Um, Honey Nut Cheerios were my favorite. I remember things like Pop Tarts and toasted strudels, and just the the standard American diet. I think that in the dinners were definitely healthier in our house. That was definitely when my parents would make something, more whole foods. They would prepare like an actual dinner, whereas the other meals were very quick, like breakfast, kind of quick breakfast, processed food meals, and then it was school lunches for lunch.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, that's what I was doing, and I remember that you know we went to see dietitians and things at the hospital, and I remember getting a book that basically, because now my life came about counting carbohydrates and giving insulin for those carbohydrates. And I remember getting a book that listed like every single food that every fast food restaurant offered and how many carbohydrates were in it. And so the message in my head was, or the message I was getting, was eat whatever you want, just count the carbohydrates and take insulin for them,
Yeah.
which is the wrong message. And I learned that a lot later. But it really illustrates, because the more carbohydrates I had, the more insulin I have to take. And that is the state of society as a whole, not just for a type 1 diabetic. Most of society is eating lots of processed carbohydrates, and their body's having to use a ton of insulin to keep their blood sugar where it needs to be. And so that's what's causing type 2 diabetes, and also just metabolic syndrome in general. And it was clear that, back in the mid 1990s when I was diagnosed, that they, didn't really care about how much insulin I had to take. They just wanted me to control blood sugars. And now looking back, you see that's how hard your body's having to work to keep blood sugars in range when you're eating that way.
Yeah. So now it's interesting because it was explicitly stated. It wasn't hinted. It was explicitly stated when Elijah was first diagnosed. Let him eat whatever he wants and just cover it with insulin. And my mind was just really blown that, these medical professions were telling us this. And one of the questions, because this was all so new to me, I was so ignorant to all of this, and I'm still learning. But one of the questions, and I remember asking the nurse, I said, well, is there an issue if he's consuming all these carbs and we're giving him a lot of insulin, obviously, to have to cover it because they were giving him the hospital meals. And I said, well, do we at any point run into any issues if you're getting too much insulin? Is there such a thing? And she says, oh, no, not at all. There's no problem whatsoever with that. So can you speak to that, to parents who are dealing with a child who's just recently diagnosed and they're hearing these things from people that they trust have their best interests at heart? Can you kind of speak to that?
Yeah. And I mean, in my opinion, it's flat out wrong. That's bad advice. And I've discovered that for myself. I've discovered that for people that I've worked with. I've discovered that for people who are not type 1 diabetic, that, eating processed carbohydrates is not good for you, no matter what the state of your health is. And so the real issue here is something called hyperinsulinemia, which means high levels of insulin. And that is the characteristic of, that is probably present in most chronic diseases. Okay. So in type 1 diabetes, we have a unique situation where we can directly see how much insulin we have to use to control blood sugar. Whereas the average person who's not type 1 diabetic, they can just eat carbohydrates and they have no idea how much insulin their body's having to use to keep their blood sugar normal. But with a type 1 diabetic, you can see that directly because the more you eat, the more your insulin you're going to have to give, more units. And so when if I had known then what I know now, then I probably would have been pretty angry about the advice that I was getting. But I wouldn't have listened to it either. And I think that is, the lesson for people, for parents who may, have a child that's been newly diagnosed. The lesson is, listen to what everybody has to say, and take the information as part of your, your library of what your knowledge of what you're going to do about this, but question it. Don't ever just believe what you're hearing, especially if it's coming from, major medical, like a huge hospital system, that kind of stuff, because we have to take into account that the advice that's being given is largely influenced by industry, the industries that fund that hospital and fund the research. And it makes no sense to me that I remember when I first got an insulin pump, and I went to the hospital for 3 days. They taught me how to use it, and there was a McDonald's in the hospital. like in the hospital. Like literally, you could walk downstairs and go to McDonald's. And I at that point I had no idea. I was only at 13, I think, at that point. But still, like this is the wrong message. And so my message to people, or my advice to people, is just question everything that you're hearing, and prove it to yourself. Like the person in front of you may be very well intentioned and very knowledgeable about what they're saying. However, they may not have all the information, and so it can be difficult. But look for that information and prove it to yourself that what they're saying is true. And then use that information to move forward.
Wow. Exactly. Nothing left to be said there. So, thank you again for that advice, because I think for a lot of parents, it can be extremely overwhelming, right? When you're first receiving this diagnosis and your assumption is whatever the doctors and the nurses and the dietitians are telling me, that this is the best thing. So I think that you're at such a vulnerable point that it's really hard sometimes to say, let me pause, especially if you don't have any prior knowledge, to say, let me pause and really question what's really being stated. You take whatever they're saying as law and what's best for you. So I think that's just such excellent advice to say, hey, take what's given, but research it and don't just receive it as, oh, this is the way, we have to play things out. So my next question now is just, let's fast forward to after your diagnosis and you doing, the standard American diet. You said that, I think it was in college, right, where things started to change for you. Did you immediately go into being a carnivore, or what was that process like?
I've only been full carnivore for the last year and 3 months, but it was in college that it's just when I started realizing that food choices that I made influenced my ability to manage the condition. I have to use less insulin. It was easier to control blood sugars. And in college is when I kind of found like my passion, which was health. And I majored in health and wellness promotion in college. My girlfriend in college was very adamant about me taking care of myself, so that helped push me along. But yeah, I became very passionate about health in college, and largely due to my own health issues. And at that time I was still, I played a ton of intramural sports, but every once in a while I'd still have like an asthma attack, and so that bothered me because I liked playing intramurals. And so it was, when I figured out that I could cut out grains and sugar and had way less issues with asthma, I was just like, that's interesting. And I was also learning all these things in classes about, food, and some of it was the wrong message, but I was just learning there was a connection between what you ate and how your body functioned, or how you lived your life and how your body functioned. And that had never been told to me before, which I find fascinating. I'd seen multiple doctors since my diagnosis and had never heard that message. And so, that was, from then it was just this, constant trial and error. And so then I went to chiropractic school right after college. And I had a vegan phase in chiropractic school, which was about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. And that didn't work at all. Blood sugars were no better or worse, I guess, but I got sick every month. I was tired all the time. And this was a really well planned out vegan diet too. Like I was into it at this point. I was doing tons of research and making sure I got all the nutrients I was supposed to be getting, and I couldn't do it. And I have no idea how I got through those 2 years of chiropractic school, being a vegan. There's 4 years total of chiropractic school, but for 2 of them I was vegan. I have no idea. I probably could have learned way more if I wasn't. But anyways, so yeah, and then I went to, after chiropractic school, I started eating more animal foods again. Well, even before I left chiropractic school. And then I went to practice in Ireland for 2 years. And that's when I really started eating a lot of animal products again. Like when it became like a base of my diet again, because before I just added them back. And so this was probably like 8 years ago. And so, yeah, I just slowly added them back and back. And then I started more of a paleo diet. And that was very, very helpful. And then I started low carb maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
And that was a game changer,
Hmm.
because without any carbohydrates, I significantly dropped my insulin requirements. I still have to give insulin though for protein, which I'd never been told. So that was something I had to learn for myself too, is that because I would eat no carbohydrates and gave, drastically low amounts of insulin, and then my blood sugar was still going higher, and I was like, what's going on? I'm not eating any carbohydrates. I thought I was insulin resistant. I was freaking out, and but then I realized you have to bolus for protein too.
Hmm.
And that was something that, if there's carbohydrates in there, then those your body's going to pay attention to those. You don't have to worry about the protein. But if you take the carbohydrates out, then you got to worry about the protein a little bit. It's not near as much insulin requirement, but you still have to do that. And then, yeah, eventually, so with all those changes, I had pretty much controlled all the inflammatory conditions I had, and it was way easier to manage type 1. Um, but there was still some things. So I was still sort of allergic to cats. So if they, got in my face, or I petted them and touched my eyes, I'd still get, but I could be in the same room with them. I could live with them, but I just had to be careful about the contact I had with them. Or sometimes I would still get a hive or two every now and then, things like that. And so, then my diet was pretty much, 80, 85% animal products at that time. And then, about a year and 3 months ago, I, um, you know, started hearing more about a carnivore diet. And I was like, well, I'm pretty much doing that. Like if I just cut out some greens and cruciferous vegetables and avocados and things, then I'm carnivore.
Hmm.
So I did. And the things that I saw were, so for a long time, I didn't have any cats, or didn't have any contact with cats. And then my wife, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we got two cats. Um, and so I noticed on my blood work that my eosinophils, which is a white blood cell, went up, and that usually goes up if you have a parasite or if there's an allergic reaction happening. And so I was like, oh well, that's probably the cats. I'm probably reacting to them in some way, even though I had no symptoms unless I got too close, right? And so when I went carnivore, that went away. Those were not elevated anymore. And I can put my face right up next to the cats. I can pet them and touch my face, and it's fine. I have no more allergy to them. I have no
And
more
how
allergy.
long did, go ahead.
I have no more allergy as far as like symptoms, and I have no more allergy on blood work.
Wow.
So
So how long did it take after going carnivore for you to see like these drastic turnarounds?
yeah, um, probably 3 months. Um, I'd say. I mean, that's when maybe it happened sooner than that, but that's when I noticed it. Um, because I took blood work before I started, and then I took blood work at 3 months. So that's when I noticed that eosinophils were down in
Okay.
normal range. But as far as the symptoms, I don't know if it may have happened sooner, but that's when I was like, oh, eosinophils are down. So like, I thought, okay, well, am I allergic to them? So I got real close to them to see, and I
Hmm.
wasn't. So
Wow. Wow. Wow.
yeah,
Well, good for the cats, I'm sure,
yeah,
for you.
yeah.
They were able to remain. So now, in terms of like the stability in your blood sugar levels, you said that you were low carb for a few years before transitioning into the carnivore diet. And you were obviously seeing improvements, right, with that. Now, after you made the transition to the carnivore diet, did you see an even greater improvement?
Um, a very slight one.
Okay.
I do feel like, and I guess it's proven because I took less insulin. So probably a month after I started, um, even though I was doing no carbohydrates before, or very low carbohydrates, on a carnivore diet, I felt like I had to use less insulin for
Mhm.
like the protein and stuff.
Okay.
And I kind of chalk that up to a few different things. One is that inflammation can interfere with insulin, signaling. And so the fact that the eosinophils went away and I wasn't allergic to cats anymore meant that inflammation was down. I
Mhm.
wasn't having that reaction. So that could be one reason why I felt like I had to use less insulin, or I was using less insulin. The other reason is that my cholesterol on a carnivore diet went way up, which is fine. People read my blog, you'll hear that that's fine. It doesn't cholesterol does not cause heart disease, but that was the only time. So lots of people who go on a low carb diet sometimes get high cholesterol, which again is fine as long as inflammation is under control. But I never experienced that on a low carb diet. When I went carnivore, that did happen. And so, but the important thing there is that cholesterol is used for many different things in your body. And one of the things it's used for, one of the intermediate molecules that your body makes in the process of making cholesterol from fat is called dolicol. And dolicol is essential for the functioning of an insulin receptor. And so all of a sudden I had all this cholesterol around and my body was able to use it to make dolicol. And now my insulin receptors are probably working better. So those two things, the drop in inflammation and more cholesterol around, I think are why I feel like I'm more insulin sensitive now on a carnivore diet than when I was eating some sort of plants. Doesn't mean I'll never eat plants again, but right now I really like what's going on. So
yeah, why not, right? Ride the train. So now, okay, so you said something which I think is a great segue into the next question. When we met with you, you shared with us that since Elijah is a newly diagnosed type 1, that we can do some things to really help to change the course. Can you speak to that and just this idea of it being an autoimmune disease and some of the things that parents or newly diagnosed patients themselves should do initially, things that could prove to be really helpful?
yeah, so what's happening in type 1 diabetes is your body has developed an improper immune reaction to the beta cells of your pancreas. And the beta cells are what make insulin. And at least that's the main theory. That's the kind of consensus theory of what's happening. And so an immune reaction happens, or an improper immune reaction happens when we have what's called leaky gut. And so leaky gut is when there's your digestive system is supposed to be like a sealed off environment all the way through your body. And if it becomes leaky, it has holes in it and things leak into the bloodstream that shouldn't be there. And when they haven't been digested enough to be there. And so the body recognizes those as foreign and it attacks them as a foreign thing, just like it would a virus or bacteria, has an immune reaction to them. And unfortunately, some of those things that can be attacked look just similar enough to another cell in our body. And so when the immune system attacks that thing, it also gets signals to attack anything else that looks like it. And so it can get confused and start attacking the wrong things, actually start self-attacking. And depending on what, if it attacked in the first place, will depend on what cell in the body it could attack. And so the key for, and there have been, multiple case studies where, we've toned down this immune reaction and autoimmune disease goes away. And that's reported all over the place. And there's even there's two that I know of that's happened to type 1 diabetes. But the key is stopping this immune reaction, because then the body stops attacking that cell, and that gives those cells that are still left a chance to reproduce and come back to normal. Okay. And so if we stop that immune reaction by healing the gut and stopping things from leaking into the bloodstream that shouldn't be there, then there's a chance that if we do it early enough, we could reverse autoimmune diseases like type 1 diabetes. So there's a case study out of a group in Hungary where they successfully reversed type 1 diabetes in a child who was newly diagnosed. Now for me, it's too late. It's been 25 years. The cells that make insulin are gone. And so even if I stop that immune reaction, which I feel I have, there's no cells for them to reproduce. There's no cells to make new cells from. And then there was another guy, I think he was Russian American, who did the same thing. He did it through a different type of diet than a carnivore diet, but he stopped the immune reaction. That's the important thing. You stop the immune reaction. And the easiest way to do that is take away all the triggers that could trigger the immune system, which you can find them in your environment. You can find them in lots of plant foods and things like that. There's a lot of triggers. So we got to remove those triggers so the gut can heal and the body can stop that reaction.
Okay, so if, again, I'm a parent that's listening to this, or newly diagnosed, type 1 patient, and I have no idea about what these, triggers are, can you just give us throw a few out there so that people can know and just go and research on their own?
Yeah, so I think that when I talk about triggers, I'm talking about things that cause leaky gut, that poke holes in our digestive system. Those are the main things. And then once that happens, you can have other triggers once that immune reaction is happening. But the main things we want to stop those holes poking. So things that have been heavily linked to causing leaky gut are grains. So that's wheat, barley, rye, oats, any type of grain. Gluten seems to be the main culprit in those, and some of those grains don't have gluten, but like wheat does, and that's a lectin that has been shown to cause leaky gut. And so there are other problems with other grains as well, but gluten's the most famous lectin in grains, but there are many. So that's one. Another one is vegetable oils, or more accurately called seed oils. But vegetable oils, what people know as canola oil, sunflower oil, soy oil, corn oil, those types of things. Those are probably the worst food on the planet. That's probably the worst thing that humans did for nutrition. Stay very clear of those. Those are very easily damaged oils, and they have been heavily linked to causing leaky gut. And then another big one is not a food. It's an herbicide called glyphosate, and this is an herbicide that I guess still is. It was made by the company Monsanto, but now Monsanto was bought by Bayer, so now it's Bayer. But so this is an herbicide that they spray on crops to. It's like a weed killer kind of thing. It's the same thing you can go to Lowe's and get in Roundup. If you go get Roundup at Lowe's, you're buying glyphosate. So don't do that. Don't put glyphosate anywhere or Roundup anywhere on your property or in your home, because that has definitely been shown to, it just pokes holes right in the gut. It goes right through it. And so if we're talking about not using that in our yards, we're talking about eating 100% organic if we're eating vegetables, because those things are that the herbicide is sprayed on things like that. Luckily, it's not something that bioaccumulates in animals, so it won't bioaccumulate in us, but if we are exposed to it, it will harm us while it's there, and then our body will get rid of it. And so it's the same thing for animals. If we're eating animals, it hasn't bioaccumulated in the tissues. So that's a good thing. We can eat animal foods and not be exposed to glyphosate, even if the animal was exposed. But I think those are the three major players: are grains, vegetable oils, and glyphosate, and probably other herbicides and pesticides as well. But glyphosate is the main one. And then, I mean, sugar is pretty inflammatory in itself. I don't think that it directly causes leaky gut, but processed sugar is even fruit sugar, I think, is terribly inflammatory, which is just going to cause a worse immune reaction when that leaky gut does happen. So those are the things we really need to avoid.
Okay. Now, as it relates to dairy and type 1, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so dairy is a interesting food because obviously some humans can eat it, and we have the lactase enzyme. We maintain that. Some people are lactose intolerant and they can't do it, but humans are the only species that drinks milk from another species, and we're the only species that drinks milk past the age of 6 months. So that's interesting. But it's not to say that dairies can't be a very good nutritious food. However, when it comes to, in the right form, I should say, because dairy, is pasteurized and homogenized, and not from grass-fed cows, and that's, all that stuff is just ruins the product. But dairy is very nutritious. Obviously, it's the first food for humans from another human. But when it comes to type 1 diabetes, I mentioned how, like, things leak into the bloodstream and your body can develop an immune reaction to them. And if it looks just similar enough to another cell in the body, it will attack that too. And so when it comes to the beta cells, there's a protein in dairy called casein that looks very similar to the structure of beta cells. And so if casein from dairy leaks into the bloodstream undigested, the body could attack it, and then the body can get confused and attack beta cells in the pancreas. That's the link there to dairy. So, early on, if I had leaky gut and I was trying to heal it, and I had type 1 diabetes, I would eliminate dairy altogether, because I don't want any unnecessary casein leaking into my bloodstream. So I can just not put it there while I try and heal my gut. But there's other examples too, like, so gluten is very linked to the thyroid. Gluten is a lectin, and that protein, when it leaks in, looks similar to the thyroid gland. Or other lectins from nightshade vegetables are associated with the joints. So your body can attack those improperly and then end up attacking your joints, giving you arthritis or rheumatoid arthritis.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always kind of connections between these different foods. But the key there is stopping the leaky gut. But if you have leaky gut, don't eat those foods that are triggering this immune response.
Got you. And you're saying, which of course they don't tell you upon diagnosis, that, hey, since this is an autoimmune disease, that if you eliminate these things, there is a good possibility that you can stop the attack on your body, and if you heal your gut. So you're saying that it's important to do this really right after diagnosis to kind of stop the process.
Yeah, very soon after diagnosis. And so that's what, the case study out of Hungary in that group, that's what they did. It was, it was a very early onset diabetes, and they intervened with what they call a paleolithic ketogenic diet, which is just a, organ meat and animal fat diet. And that's what they had the child eat. And now, as far as at the end of the study and the follow-up they did, the child was not using insulin. He didn't need insulin. I think it was a he. Yeah, and so it's not to say that'll happen for everybody, but we do have evidence that if we stop this immune reaction, then you might as well try and do it, and at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, then you've still got a diet that's going to be very easy to manage blood sugars with. It doesn't mean that they can't ever have a carbohydrate or a vegetable ever, but we know what the baseline diet should be, to control this, and that's what we should shoot for.
Okay. And how long? So, like, let's just say you're newly diagnosed, you're hearing this information, and you're like, yes, hey, there's hope here. I want to try it. How long would you say, that someone should try it to really see the results? Is it, let me just try this for 2 weeks? What would be your recommendation?
Yeah, I think definitely longer than 2 weeks, but it's really hard to give any type of timeline on it. I would say I would want to do it at least 6 months though. Okay. So I know people who are not type 1 diabetic, but have just tried the carnivore diet and didn't really feel much difference for anything until like 6 months. And at 6 months, because they stuck with it, all of a sudden they noticed some differences in their health, some benefits in their health. And so it can take a while, like depending on what the body's been through and what it has to get through to, like, once you allow it to be able to start to heal, it may take it a while to get to the point where you start to notice the healing. Mm-hmm. It's been happening all along, but until you notice it can be a while. But some people, see benefits from carnivore after 2 weeks, like in clearing up of skin and things like that. And so all that is just drops in inflammation, and so it really varies depending on the person. I'd say kids are probably going to respond quicker than an adult whose physiology has been, full grown for a while, and has also had more exposure to poor quality foods and toxins and things than the child has. But it's really just going to be I think, different for everybody.
Different, got you. All right, so just a few more questions here. Can you speak to organ meats, eating organ meats as you're trying to heal the gut, and even broth, and just any supplements? Do you have any supplements that you would recommend?
Yeah. Organ meats, I think. So I'm not huge on supplements per se, because most of them in the industry are, you know, in like a processed food, like especially like protein powders and things. But even then, like there's been some research done by independent labs that just started pulling supplements off the shelf and found that they were contaminated with heavy metals, or that they had less than 10% of what they had in them, what they claimed were in them. Less than 10% of that was in there. And so the only supplements I do use are, whole food based supplements, where we're just, like if people don't like to eat organ meats, then, there's companies that freeze dry organs and put them in a powder form so that we can get them. And why that's important is because organ meats are the most nutrient dense and bioavailable food source out there. And what I mean by bioavailable is that, kale has tons of vitamins and minerals. However, it also has anti-nutrients that prevent you from absorbing a lot of those. So it's not as bioavailable, whereas animal foods don't have the anti-nutrients. So, and our digestive system is designed for direct absorption from an animal food. So we get way more nutrients from eating animal foods. And if we want to get the most out of that, organ meats are the most nutrient dense. And so they also come with, lots of the fat soluble vitamins, which can be hard to get sometimes for some people. And so those things are going to help tone down an immune response and not ramp it up, because there's no plant toxins or anything. And then people can also do bone broth. Although I've done an interesting experiment just in the last 2 weeks with doing lower histamine in my diet. And bone broth is known for having higher histamine, but it's not because it makes histamine itself. It's because people usually make a big batch of bone broth, and histamine develops when you cook a food and it's cooling. And so, and then when you do that with bone broth, you end up heating it and cooling it multiple times, throughout the week when you make a big batch of it, and that can make a lot of histamine. And I've noticed that a little bit better sensitivity. I was getting weird low blood sugars that were uncharacteristic for me when I stopped doing histamine. And so I thought that was interesting. I don't have any conclusions to that yet, but I'm still experimenting with that. But bone broth is very important as far as, collagen protein is very important, I should say, to helping heal the lining of the gut, because the one layer of the gut is collagen fibers, and those have become broken down when you have leaky gut. So you want to give your body what it needs to repair those. So collagen is important, and we'll get collagen from, eating the connective tissue parts of a steak, or you could supplement with some collagen protein, as long as it's a clean source and nothing, no binding or agents or anything like that. But connective tissue is very important to get in our diets, and people usually just don't get enough of it. So bone broth can be a good source of that. And the jury's still out on histamine, but that's the other part of this, is that kidney has what's called diamine oxidase in it, and that helps your body break down histamine. And your body makes that itself. It makes diamine oxidase itself. And so I've been taking, I've been eating kidney, but also taking kidney supplements, and seeing if that's going to have an effect on insulin sensitivity and things like that. So it's just this big complex picture, but organ meats are incredibly important, I think, because it's kind of like an insurance policy, making sure you get the vitamins and minerals you need.
Okay, so now if I'm not a big fan of organ meats, but I'm like, okay, I hear what you're saying, and I see that this could possibly help me. Are there specific organ meats that you would recommend for a type 1, newly diagnosed type 1?
I would definitely say kidney.
Okay.
Like I was talking about, and then liver as well.
Okay.
And then,
You're breaking.
Can you hear me?
You know what? Can you repeat it? You just said kidney and liver, and then you kind of started breaking up.
Yeah, and then I think heart is good as well,
Okay.
because that's going to help with metabolism. It has CoQ10. That's going to help with fat burning metabolism things. But yeah, I think those are good. And so you can get, there's a company called Paleo Valley that makes a good organ supplement, but there's also ancestral supplements that make very, very good organ meats. And then also one of my favorite things is, and it has some spices in it, so, but I kind of don't worry about that. But there's at US Wellness Meats, they have a liverwurst where it's like 60% meat and then 40% heart, liver, and kidney. And they grind it up into like a kind of a beef kind of thing, and you don't really notice a difference. So I like those things.
All right, you're gonna have taste. All right. Well, this was awesome. I don't know if actually, I have one final question.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm hearing this and it seems just so overwhelming to me, and it's like, oh, I don't know if I can make all of these changes, but I'm willing to try something. What would you say from everything that you just shared from a dietary standpoint? If you feel like you can't do everything that you recommended, where would you say, or I guess, what are some of the few things that you shared that you feel should be at the top of the list? And I guess you kind of answered that already, but just to summarize.
Well, yeah, just to kind of recap a little bit, I think lowering the amount of carbohydrates.
Okay.
And it's not that carbohydrates are bad. I don't want people to think that they're evil, but it's just how our metabolism works.
Mm-hmm.
And you could attain insulin sensitivity on a very high carbohydrate diet, but you wouldn't be able to eat any fat, and then you miss out on all the nutrients from fat. And so fat is a better fuel source for sure. And when we have fat and carbohydrates at the same time, that's a metabolic disaster for us, for our physiology. And so fat's a better fuel source. And so I would say, don't be afraid of fat and start moving your diet in a direction toward protein and fat. Like, that's what I think is best for our bodies to be running on. It doesn't have to be all at once. You don't have to drop everything and totally start doing something totally different. It's always a stepwise process for a lot of people. But just start phasing out some of the high processed carbohydrate foods, or even some of the plant foods, and start moving more toward foods that are more bioavailable to us as humans, which is animal-based foods. And so I think if you start that direction, then you start researching and you start looking up, which there's lots of resources out there now. You just start educating yourself. You're going to gain momentum, gain confidence, and eventually you'll get to where you want to be.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So can you just share with us, about your health coaching, where people can find you after this interview if they want to, kind of connect with you?
Yeah. My website is resourceyourhealth.com. And on there, people can find my books and my blog. I write a lot about the heart, because type 1 diabetes predisposes me to heart disease. So I've looked into that a lot. Yeah, and then they can also find like information about my health coaching on there as well. And then I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. It's just Dr. Stephen Hussey. People can find me there and message me there if they want as well.
Okay, can you repeat that again, because you started breaking up when you were telling us about Facebook and Instagram?
Yeah, so my website is resourceyourhealth.com, and then on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, it's just Dr. Stephen Hussey. People can find me there and message me.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for this interview. It was awesome, and I just hope that, many will find it to be helpful.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, no problem.